This lecture focuses primarily on queer and trans immigration issues, but understanding the broader context of current immigration enforcement is necessary to grasp the specific vulnerabilities facing queer and trans immigrants. So the main themes I'll explore here are: number one, historical discrimination against queer and trans immigrants in U.S. law. This will be kind of a review for you. Number two, how current immigration enforcement affects all immigrants, creating the backdrop for queer and trans experiences. Number three, the specific dangers and challenges facing queer and trans immigrants. And then finally, number four, I'll wrap up by talking about community organizing and resistance efforts. So first, a little historical context. For decades, U.S. immigration law explicitly discriminated against queer and trans people. I could go, very far back into the early 20th century, but I'm going to start with 1965. So in 1965, we saw a huge shift in immigration law, and the Immigration and Nationality Act actually banned quote-unquote sexual deviants from entering the country using medical language to exclude LGBTQ plus people and requiring their deportation. In 1987, in the midst of the AIDS epidemic, President Reagan signed a ban preventing HIV/AIDS positive people from entering the U.S., which of course disproportionately impacted the queer and trans community. And this law remained in effect from 1987 all the way until 2010, when it was repealed under Obama. Finally, in 1990, sexual orientation was finally removed as grounds for exclusion. In 1994, the first asylum case based on persecution for sexual orientation was granted. So that's less than 35 years ago. And in 1996, Congress passed, as you know, the Defense of Marriage Act, or DOMA, which prevented same-sex couples from sponsoring partners for green cards. And then in 2013, part of DOMA was struck down, finally allowing same-sex couples the same immigration rights as different sex couples. So this history matters because it shows how recently LGBTQ plus people gained basic immigration rights that others have long taken for granted. Okay, let me share the story of Andre Hernandez Romero to help us understand what's happening now. Andre was a 31-year-old gay makeup artist from Venezuela. In his home country, he faced violence for being gay and for his political views. In May of 2024, he made the dangerous journey to the United States, traveling through the Darien Gap, a 60-mile stretch of dense jungle between Colombia and Panama, where migrants face robbery, assault, and really harsh conditions. When Andre reached the U.S.-Mexico border near San Diego, he presented himself as at a legal border crossing to request asylum. He passed his credible fear interview, meaning that immigration officials determined his fears were legitimate and he had a good chance of winning his asylum case. But in March of 2025, right, Trump is now president, while his asylum case was still pending, Andre was deported, and immigration officials accused him of being in the Tren de Aragua gang. And you know what was their evidence? Crown tattoos on his body. His attorney explained that these tattoos were the names of his parents and related to his work in beauty pageants. But nonetheless, he was sent to El Salvador's maximum security CICOT prison, a facility designed for terrorism suspects. He described the conditions as, quote, like hell. Detainees never saw natural light, were packed hundreds to a room with no privacy, and faced constant beatings. Andre said they were, quote, physically and verbally and psychologically tortured for 125 days. A photojournalist captured Andre pleading his innocence. He said, "I'm not a gang member, I'm gay, I'm a stylist," while crying for his mother as guards slapped him and shaved his head. In July 2025, Andre was released in a prisoner swap and returned to Venezuela, where he's back to working as a makeup artist while speaking out about his experience. Okay, so now I want to switch gears and talk about the the bigger picture for current immigration enforcement. Um, and I think, mostly I want to focus on the Trump administration, but I think it's important to understand something about Democrats' immigration here. So, immigration enforcement has expanded under both the Democrats and the Republicans. President Obama, for instance, deported more immigrants than any previous president, earning him the nickname, quote, deporter in chief among many immigrant rights activists. President Biden also carried out significant deportations. So this bipartisan expansion of immigration enforcement created, right, the infrastructure, the detention facilities, the enforcement personnel, the legal frameworks that make today's mass deportations under Trump possible. So you have to understand the role that Democrats also played. But under, Trump's, we could talk more about Trump's first administration, but I want to focus on his second administration. Under his second administration, since he was inaugurated in January of 2025, enforcement has intensified significantly. Funding, right? Congress allocated $170 billion for immigration and border enforcement in the summer of 2025, including $75 billion for ICE alone, making it the highest funded federal law enforcement agency with a budget larger than the militaries of every country except the US and China. So while Trump's campaign emphasized deporting immigrants who had committed violent crimes, his actual policy has targeted undocumented immigrants broadly, regardless of criminal history. This includes long-term residents with established lives and families in America, or in the US, I should say. So, this means that somebody who has been living here for decades, has never violated the law, somebody like that is being scooped up by immigration enforcement officers and detained and deported. So this is kind of a new version of the separation policies, family separation policies that we saw during Trump's first presidency. So the Trump administration also is doing something called expedited removal. So he's expanded expedited removal nationwide, which means that ICE is allowed to deport people anywhere in the country without a court hearing if they can't immediately prove that they have lived in the US for at least 2 years. So what are they doing to enact these expedited removal proceedings? They're showing up at courthouses where undocumented immigrants are following what judges have told them to do, show up at their hearings, and ICE agents are showing up and just detaining them and immediately deporting them. So they're also showing up at schools and hospitals and even, places of worship. And this is, of course, creating widespread fear with families avoiding medical care and sometimes even keeping children home from school. The administration, though it says it's only targeting, undocumented immigrants, has also targeted immigrants with legal status, particularly those who support Palestinian human rights. To just give you one example, the most famous example is that of Mahmoud Khalil, who is a Columbia University graduate student and Palestinian activist with a green card, who was detained and separated from his pregnant wife, who was a U.S. citizen, who gave birth to their first child while he was in immigration detention. So he's been released, but the Trump administration is still pursuing deportation, even though he's here legally. And it's all because he's Palestinian and he was involved in Palestinian rights activism. So I want to note that one key difference between Democrats and Republicans is the kind of dehumanizing rhetoric used by Republicans to refer to immigrants. Trump and others in his administration have referred to undocumented immigrants as, quote, illegals, as animals, as aliens, as people with, quote, bad genes. He's described immigration as an invasion. He falsely claimed that Haitian refugees in Springfield, Ohio were, quote, eating the pets of the people that live there, unquote. The rhetoric is also racist and sexist. Media pundits and politicians have attacked immigrant reproduction. So immigrant women having kids, promoting this old stereotype that of Latina immigrants in particular as, quote, excessive breeders. They use the term anchor babies most commonly these days. claiming people who have children in the US, they're doing so, right, just to gain citizenship. So they're coming here to have children so that their children can gain citizenship, and then, like, 20 something years later, they can maybe give their parents citizenship. So this language referring to the children of undocumented immigrants as anchor babies, or as like dropping anchor babies, is dehumanizing, right? It combines racism and sexism. So on January 20th, 2025, Trump issued an executive order attempting to end birthright citizenship, the right established under the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, guaranteeing that anyone born in the U.S. is a citizen. So this is the first attempt by any sitting president to undo this right, which has been affirmed repeatedly by judges of both parties, from both parties, so judges appointed by Republicans and Democrats. If enacted, if the Supreme Court says that this is, Trump's decision to invalidate birthright citizenship is valid, the policy would directly impact 300,000 children born annually and can leave some children totally stateless. So, and I, just as an aside, the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was passed after the Civil War, and the purpose was to provide equality to everybody born in the United States, regardless of race or ethnicity. And of course, at that time, it was specifically meant to impact African Americans, newly emancipated African Americans, but has since, right, been upheld by both Republicans and Democrats across the last 150 years or so, over 150 years, because it's viewed as foundational to who we are as a country, this idea that people born here have equal rights. So to undo this, right, is a direct attack on the kind of fundamental concept of equality. So let's talk about trans and queer immigrants. During Trump's first administration, I just wanted to mention that he instituted what's called a Remain in Mexico policy, requiring asylum seekers to stay in Mexico during their proceedings, and in these, they set up camps in Mexico, and it wasn't just immigrants from Mexico, it was immigrants from elsewhere in Latin America, sometimes outside of Latin America, trying to come to the United States through Mexico. They were told to stay in Mexico. So they were living in encampments in very awful conditions. And of course, in these camps, trans migrants in particular, but also queer migrants in general, face a lot of violence, including sexual violence. So under the current administration, according to the UCLA Williams Institute, up to 288,000 undocumented LGBTQ immigrants are among those most likely to be impacted by current policies. So executive orders require identification documents, so passports and visas, be based solely on sex assigned at birth, which of course would impact applications by trans people in particular. And these changes particularly harm transgender immigrants fleeing persecution in countries where they already face extraordinary violence. So research has extensively documented that conditions for trans individuals in immigration detention are particularly dangerous. One peer-reviewed study found a systemic pattern of victimization, including physical and sexual assault, long-term solitary confinement, and denial of life-saving, gender-affirming services, and often also, I should say, denial of access to HIV/AIDS drugs. So here's one shocking statistic. Trans individuals comprise approximately 1 in 500 people in immigration detention, yet account for 1 in 5 substantiated complaints of sexual assault. So let's wrap up by talking about specific policy harms and community resistance and activism. The Trump administration shut down the refugee program. On January 20th, 2025, Trump decided that the government would stop accepting refugees, with the exception of some white Afrikaners from South Africa. So he's prioritizing white immigrants from South Africa, right? A country historically structured by racial apartheid, and is still a very racially unequal society, privileging white people who, for instance, are more likely to be landowners, right? There's economic inequality along the lines of race in South Africa. And what Trump is doing is saying that white people are facing discrimination in South Africa, and they are the ones being allowed in. Let's look at an example of what this policy does to trans people. One trans woman who had escaped from a forced conversion therapy institution in Kenya, where she had faced sexual violence and she was, physical violence, was awaiting her refugee interview when Trump paused the program, right? So she was out of luck, basically. And in June 2025, the administration also ended a long-standing exception that allowed families of refugees and asylees who couldn't lawfully marry in their home countries, right, due to laws discriminating against LGBTQ plus couples, to reunite in the United States. So Trump just got rid of this. So despite these challenges, right, communities are organizing to protect and support immigrants, and this work is both urgent and deeply personal. For nearly 10 years, and let's talk about Sacramento. So for nearly 10 years, NorCal Resist has been fighting for immigrant rights in Sacramento. When Trump was inaugurated for his second term, volunteers noticed an immediate surge in panicked calls from places, like Afghanistan, the Ukraine, and Venezuela, trying to understand what the new executive orders meant for them and their families. The organization doesn't just provide abstract support. They've actually built concrete lifelines. Their Migra Watch hotline allows community members to report ICE activity in real time. And when families become too afraid to leave their homes, volunteers deliver food and diapers to their door. They run brake light clinics because they know that a broken taillight can become a pretext for detention and deportation. In July 2025, the stakes of this work became viscerally clear. That morning, Jose Castillo, one of their volunteers, was recording Border Patrol agents during a raid at Home Depot in Sacramento, documenting what was happening so there would be evidence, so people would know. He was arrested and maced for bearing witness. That same day, or I don't know if it was the same day, but in July of 2025, NorCal Resist held a rally at the California State Capitol in honor of civil rights icon John Lewis, right, refusing to let fear silence their demands for justice. They've also held other immigrant rights rallies to keep up public pressure and make clear to the immigrant community that there is, people in Sacramento actually care about and love immigrants and do not support the policies of the Trump administration. So the organization's volunteers also show up at Sacramento's federal immigration court, trying to document suspected ICE operations. Organizer Giselle Garcia describes the frustration, quote, ICE blocks us from being able to obtain basic identifying information so that we can connect with them, immigrants, with attorneys, so we can locate them in the detainee system, unquote. So, and that's illegal, right? These are volunteers, including lawyers, who should be allowed access to immigrants to help them, but ICE blocks that access. So NorCal Resist is fighting just to learn people's names, just to help them access legal representation, right? Basic rights that should be guaranteed, but have to be fought for person by person. The Trans Latina Coalition, let's talk about that for a second. So when Bambi Salcedo founded the Trans Latina Coalition, she created something that many transgender immigrants desperately needed, a refuge. Since Trump took office, calls to the organization have at least doubled. People are terrified, trying to figure out what the new policies mean for their lives, their safety, and their futures. And the coalition addresses situations that reveal, right, the layered vulnerabilities trans immigrants face. Some are victims of sexual violence, domestic violence, or trafficking, and their abusers weaponize their immigration status, threatening deportation to keep them silent and trapped. The Trans Latina Coalition steps into this gap, offering not just legal information, but community solidarity, and the message that, right, they deserve protection and dignity. There's also a group called Immigration Equality that has mobilized lawyers and advocates to provide legal services specifically for LGBTQ plus and HIV positive asylum seekers. people who often face additional barriers in providing their cases or in proving their cases because their persecution is based on identities that some immigration judges don't understand or take seriously. So across these organizations and others, right, all work, this work is multifaceted, it's relentless. They're engaging in community education, and they're organizing legal clinics, public demonstrations, and local and national LGBTQ plus rights organizations have been coordinating with each other as well, building networks of support because they know that no one organization can do this alone. So I think this activism is born from one simple truth. When the government won't protect vulnerable people, communities, right, must protect each other. And they are.